July 3rd, 2021. I haven't done a walkthrough of my forest garden project here in at least a year or two. So I figured I should do that and sort of see how things are looking at this stage. For people who don't know, this entire front section here pretty much all got cut down, run over, bulldozed, destroyed 2 years ago for these beautiful new power poles we've got here. They had heavy equipment over this whole area, and so most of what you're seeing here is either been cleared out and some of it's been replanted. This particular area in the front here has been a problem area. I've never had much success growing anything. Almost everything I've planted up here has died after a number of years and just not done well. So maybe there's something going on with the soil there. But anyway, I used to have a really nice hedgerow down through here under the power lines, and you'll see a remnant of that as we go farther south. But this stuff you're seeing here, this is all replanted last year. So this is a second year growth of stuff. You can see autumn olive here is the star. Nothing grows as fast or as well as autumn olive does on this site. Behind the autumn olive, you can see a couple of Catalpa trees that were coppiced, cut down 2 years ago, and that's 2 years of regrowth. Those grow back pretty well. I love Catalpa trees. And then this area up here, this was all, I scattered some compost around and put down a light layer of wood chips and leaf mold, and I planted a mix of native wildflower seeds mostly. And there's some things that have come back through the compaction and the disturbance, things that I'd planted like mints or some perennial plants, but for the most part this is new growth here. And there's some clovers in there, some brown-eyed Susans flowering, some lance-leaf coreopsis flowering, and whatnot. Cup plant is growing there. There's a mullein, the tall stalk in the middle there. As I pan over here, this is a wildflower garden. This garden's kind of become overrun mostly with grasses. A lot of the forbs and wildflowers are less prominent than they used to be. There's a lot of big blue stem that's come in and kind of dominated it. So it's not as pretty as it was like 6 or 7 years ago. May have to do something, maybe burning it would get rid of some of the grass problem. As I pan over this way, here I've got a pawpaw tree, which is I had about 5 of them planted up here. I've got 2 that are kind of barely still alive after getting smashed down or disturbed by the power company. So that one, I'm hoping it'll make it. Got a little pond over there. That's also where our 2 kitties are buried. That's their permanent resting place. Cats that I had for 17 or 18 years. In this circle here, there's a chestnut tree which it's been growing for 10 years or more. It died to the ground several winters. It died to the ground this last winter and never regrew. And knowing that it was a troublesome tree, I planted a persimmon next to it, and that's actually what you see that's got leaves on it there. And there's a couple of red buds that have shown up of their own accord. And so the persimmon tree is the new tree in that spot. Hell with that chestnut. So as we walk up here, let's pan over a bit. This is all newly planted stuff. We've got some currants, got some peaches, got gumi, autumn olive, there's a hawthorn, there's a pear tree, what else? A few odds and ends. It was kind of a chance to start from scratch up here. And then the ground cover, give you an idea of what our season has been like. It was a very dry winter, very, very dry spring. And up until about 2 weeks ago, we were in severe drought, and most of the ground layer here was looking very bad and very crispy. But we miraculously got about 10 inches of rain in the last 2 weeks. And so everything is kind of greened up nicely. That's one reason I'm making this video right now, is because things look a lot better. And I'm really glad for that rain. So yeah, you can see a lot of things are flowering or about to flower here. Still have a lot of deer and rabbit pressure up here. But yeah, and we also had late frosts this year. We had frosts May 29th and 30th, after things were well underway for leafing out and flowering. So not much fruit on most of the fruit trees. This pear tree, which I had to cut about half of the top of it off a year or two ago because of fire blight, it actually has a few pears on it this year, which is cool. That's kind of surprising. But there are a few on there. There's a Siberian pea shrub here behind that with the bean type leaves. And then behind that we've got a beautiful linden tree. This thing is probably, sorry, I can try to reduce the glare here. This thing's probably 15 feet tall, and right now it's in peak flower. Smells awesome. You see a lot of bees working on it. These flowers smell amazing, and my friend Sam's gonna come over and actually harvest some of these. He's gonna make some kind of a cordial or some fermented thing out of them, so that's great. And linden, the reason I planted this, not even knowing how cool the flowers were originally, the young tender leaves of these, like this one, where they're kind of lighter in color and sort of translucent, these are edible as a salad leaf. It's not quite as tender as lettuce, but it's pretty good. It's edible, and it's not bad in a salad. There's a mullein plant there that's getting its leaves eaten by something. The old apple trees here, not many fruit on those this year, just a very few, and what fruit there is doesn't look good. Sorry for my hand there. Here we've got about a 2-year regrowth of coppice on this false indigo bush, and these finished flowering a couple weeks ago. Those flowers also smell really nice, but you can see kind of the growth form of a 2nd-year coppice. And this tall tree here, that's a chestnut. This one has also been a problematic tree and has never done very well. I also planted a persimmon alongside that as a replacement, figuring that it was not going to live very long. You know, I don't like things that re-die to the ground or die back to the ground every couple of years, so it just doesn't seem like it's going to work out in the long term. Here we've got a nannyberry bush in the center of the frame, and behind that is a tall European style chestnut. Then this is the part of the hedgerow that didn't get destroyed. So this hedgerow was planted in 2011, and so there's a mix of starting from right to left. We've got serviceberry as the tall thing there, then there's American hazelnut, 9 bark, probably another serviceberry, another hazelnut, 9 bark. It's not a totally repeating pattern, but it's a mix of similar species over and over. And one of my favorite things in this hedgerow is actually blooming right now. This is a great time to show this. This is a native rose. I couldn't tell you exactly which species, if it's Rosa Carolina or another one, but this is what they would call a pasture rose or a meadow rose. But these, they've got kind of a variable flower. Some of them are bright, vivid pink. Some of them are almost white, but they're just gorgeous in flower and very popular with bees. You can see it's like a honeybee working on that one up there. So this is a wonderful plant, and I've propagated a lot more of these to put into the replanted hedgerow, because I wish I would have incorporated more of these to begin with, because they're just so cool. And they're thorny, so they can act as a good barrier plant if you were trying to keep things in or out of a garden. So as we pan over here, you're gonna have to pardon a big mess, but I've got in these raised air pruning beds, I've got some chestnut seedlings here. Behind that, there's some cuttings of elderberry and I think red currant that are growing. And there's chestnuts in the back. Behind us here, this big bush, there's a false indigo, and then behind that is a large little leaf linden. Again, this one doesn't have flowers. I think it's slower to come into flower. It got coppiced at some point by a rabbit and regrew, so it's got multiple stems instead of one stem like the other one has. But yeah, there's a couple elderberries here, and those are actually trying to flower. And I've been pinching the flowers off because that's too much to ask of a small plant like that doesn't have its own root system. And then here are some Nanking cherries in the back there. Those are all little ones that I pulled out of my yard, and I'm growing them for a little while longer. But yeah, this hedgerow is filled out nicely. These were planted at 6-foot spacings And again, mostly it's the same, like 5 or 6 species over and over. And then these big bunch grasses, I would just call that a Pompous Grass. They get to be about 6 feet tall, give or take a foot, and depending on maybe the moisture of the season and the maturity of the plant. But those are a nice kind of hedging plant and also a nice mulch plant. They're a good source for mulch in the spring. So here's a kind of a little forlorn, abandoned nursery area. Here's a little pond that needs to be redone. The liner leaks, and it didn't have any water in it at all until all the rains we got, and then it almost filled up on its own. And cattails showed up there on their own like the second year that I had this pond, which is pretty amazing. Here's a bunch of wood nettle. There's some nursery stuff here. I had to move this shed about 12 feet this spring as part of the agreement with the power company. So I'm going to walk us around here, not show all my mess. Some of this mess is not mine, but here we've got some primo cane blackberries, and it looks like some oak saplings that have come up, redbud tree that I did not plant. Let me pan away from this junk. My old vegetable garden here is, I've been trying to transition it over to perennials like currants and other stuff. There's a bunch of honeyberries in there. Honeyberries are not doing well. I think it's way too dry for them. And then I've still got a lot of moles that tunnel through there, so they disturb the soil. So now we're panning. There's a kitty. Hi, Gomer. This area here, this was an area I stopped mowing a few years ago, and there used to be a large elm tree here that fell down. That's what you see the remnants of. And I've learned that wherever you've got some shade and some bird perches, you get an emergent forest pretty quickly. The succession happens a lot faster than it happens in the open field in the back. So this area here, there are hundreds of seedlings of serviceberries, apple trees, autumn olives, wild black cherry, sassafras, grapes, you name it. Oh, poison ivy as well, because of course the birds love to eat poison ivy berries. So managing that is kind of a fun project. I have to get in there and do some more selective cuttings, but quite a few eastern red cedars here that have come up. And these all grew up in like the last 4 or 5 years probably. So yeah, if you just stop mowing for a little while, in the right circumstances, this is what can happen. So this area here, I've got some blueberry plants, but they're not looking that good this year. It was so dry that it just about killed them off. There's a Catalpa Tree growing there. That flowered for the first time this year, and actually I think a few of the flowers are still visible, but they're probably too far up to really see. And then here, this area was a grove. There's a mother tree of sassafras. I stopped mowing it at some point, maybe 8 years ago. Kind of used to have like an edging here of logs, but that's all kind of vanished into the grass now. But anyway, I wanted this to grow out and grow up and let this go, knowing how sassafras behave, because I wanted more of a barrier here between, there's a semi-truck parking lot over here, so that's noisy and it's ugly. Didn't really want to see it or hear it. So that's you know, they filled the space out well. So as I walk in here, I planted some of these golden black raspberries here, and this is just a natural variant of the wild black raspberry. But you can see there's a pretty good crop. I don't know if it'll focus here. And these are these are a good berry. If you get them at the right stage, and they're perfect. Like some of these are overripe here. Those are no good. That one's pretty good. You know, like these. Come on, focus. This one would be great. This one's not quite ready. I'm gonna pick a few of these here and eat these while I'm chatting. But these are a favorite of a lot of people who visit this garden. They love these just because they're so pretty, and also they taste good. They're a little different than the black raspberry in flavor, but it's a nice flavor. Okay. A little tart, a little sweet. So this area here where you see all these grassy, sedgy looking things, this is another wildflower garden that I planted in 2010. And it's getting invaded a bit by sassafras, runners and also sumac runners from the other side. But for the most part, it's been holding its own. I've kind of let this sedge grass come in here just because it's not really bothering anything, and the wildflowers seem to do okay with it still. Oh, this looks like one of the first Monarda blooms of the season. People say that blooms around the 4th of July, so this pretty purple flower here, this will look like an ocean of that stuff in a week or two. That's a very prominent plant in my garden recently. Over the years, it's done well. So you see a butterfly milkweed there, the orange in the middle. That's persisted. And then here, there's this tree canopy, and then there's a few pawpaws that I've planted, like this one in the center of the frame. These have done great. They've done so much better there. And under those sassafras trees we just walked through where the berries were, than they have like in other spots that are more open. So as we pan over here, you'll see a pawpaw ahead of us. There's an autumn olive to the south of it. This pawpaw is doing okay. There's some more back there. There's one, but they really appreciate and kind of need some shade when they're in their first few years, and then they'll grow so much better. And actually, there's a milestone here. This pawpaw has sent out its first root runner into the area. So that's kind of like getting its first deer rub or something. It's a milestone in the growth of that species. So there's a pawpaw here. This one's not as happy because it's in more sun and it was planted later than that one was. As we come here, we've got my attempt at a Catalpa coppice area, but I'm thinking I probably planted these too close. I probably should take out at least every other one if I want them to actually grow well. But these have been growing for probably 5 years or so, I'd say at least. As we come down the lane here, we've got a couple of very sad little plum trees down here that have hardly grown at all over the years. A few Oikos plums. We've got an that's not autumn olive. This is a serviceberry that I planted in 2010, kind of arching over the pathway here. There's some autumn olives, another catalpa growing up tall. There's a couple of goji berries down here, and those have not done well for me. So now we're walking west. This is another wildflower planting. This one was done from seed and not from plugs. I've got quite a few that I've done from seed, and I've noticed that the grasses tend to come and take over these after a couple of years. So I probably should be burning these or something so that the thatch doesn't build up so much. But there's some false indigo that must have been in the seed mix. Catalpa that came in from somewhere. I should dig that up and move it. More Monarda and other stuff. So this thicket here, there's a few things going on in here, but there's autumn olive with the silvery leaves, and then the main part of this thicket is, I think it's a wild goose plum from Oikos. And Ken said that he didn't think that this was a thicket forming plum, but this one sure is. Whatever it is, I don't know if it is a wild goose because it's not flowered or fruited for me, but maybe next year given the size of it. And the main piece of this, actually, we spaded it out and moved it because of the power line construction. There used to be a large silver maple tree here which got taken down, and you'll see kind of the remnants of that laying around. And there was another power pole over here too. So I'm going to walk us over this way. Again, this is kind of where the end of where the original hedgerow kind of ended. And then as we go that way, that's all pretty much stuff that's been replanted. There's a few stragglers up here that avoided getting mown 2 years ago, but for the most part, this is all newly replanted stuff. So now we're walking northwest, and I'm not gonna go through the whole Chestnut area because there's just a lot of disappointments to show over there. A lot of things that have grown well for a few years and then somehow they've died and regrown, and it's just pretty frustrating. So I don't know what's going on with my chestnuts. Some of them are growing okay, a lot of them are not growing that well. I did a lot of mulching, these wood chip piles you see here. After we got some rain, I wanted to get some mulch down, so after the first few days of rain, I spent a lot of time bringing about 6 or 8 truckloads of wood chip mulch and spreading them around different areas of the garden to try to preserve some of that moisture. And here's an example in the middle here. This tree grew really well, nice and straight for I don't know how many years, 3-4 years. And then for some reason it just died, and now it's regrowing from the base. But of course the deer have discovered those sprouts, and then those are nice and tender, and so the deer are hammering those. So I don't know, this doesn't have any obvious signs of blight. It doesn't have ambrosia beetle damage. I don't know what happened with it, but it's kind of a bummer. And I've got, you know, quite a number that have done things like that. So we'll just walk around. Some of these chestnuts have some leaf issues. They look less than perfect, but I don't know. I'm gonna keep trying them because I'm really interested in chestnuts. I love chestnuts. I want those to be one of my main crops, and I want them to be kind of a dietary staple at some point. There's a big dragonfly down there. Hi, guy. Or lady. Let's see, here's the chestnut in the middle here. It's covered in flowers. This chestnut's never produced a nut, at least not a nut with anything inside of it. It's produced empty burrs before, but it's flowering nicely this year. This is one I got at a tree or plant sale in Pawpaw probably 8-9 years ago at least, and growing very slowly. You know, you can see it's resprouting from the base as well. So not super happy to be growing here, I don't think, but it's still alive, so we'll keep it going as best we can. And then the overhead here, this is black locust, and that's the tallest. These are the tallest canopy trees that I've planted here, and these were planted about 10 years ago, and I'd say they're at least 25 feet tall, maybe give or take a few feet. And I had a couple flowers on those this year, not very many, but you know, they do produce quite a lot of shade pretty quickly. Well, a dappled shade, not a heavy, dense shade. But they're beautiful, useful trees. They're just thorny, and they root sucker like crazy. These were dug up as root suckers, and I think that's part of the reason why the ones that I planted here are suckering so badly, is because they started with that tendency. If you grow one from seed, which I've also done, those are not root suckering like these are. And I think that's the difference. So we're coming back here. This is the little pond area that I have, my excavation. It's not really a pond, but this has been bone dry all season. And now it's still dry, although there was just a little bit of water in the bottom of it a few days ago. And growing on the edge of it, there's some mullein, some St. John's wort, some apple sprouts. Actually grafted a few apples onto these sprouts here. I'm not sure if those are from this tree, if those are part of its root system, or if they're seedlings that somehow sprouted up. But that apple tree doesn't look very great this year. It doesn't have much foliage. I'm wondering if it's got some issues. Little chestnut here growing pretty well. This is one of Allison's seedlings. As we turn here, there's box elder that I didn't plant there. There's a wild black cherry I didn't plant there, but I let these trees come and grow for a while just to give some more structure to the garden, create biomass, improve the soil, try to move things more toward a soil or a forest ecosystem rather than a grassland. This dead stem here in the middle, that's probably 9 feet tall. That's a chestnut that grew for some years and then just died for no apparent reason. So there's one that I replanted last year in its place. Sea buckthorn here. I've got several sea buckthorns in this area. The healthiest looking one I have is here. This one looks great. And I realized that these are really not at all drought tolerant, and that's probably why most of the ones I've planted have died. So I've been trying to baby them a bit more, give them more mulch, and spot water them as needed. There's a couple more down there that are just sort of barely clinging to life. In this area here, these are 3 north-south rows of chestnuts. I'm growing in a coppice system. That's the idea. And I need to replant some of them. Some of them have died, but for the most part, they're still alive. And there's a couple of honey locust seedlings. That's what these 2 tall things are. And there's a couple of autumn olives in there too. And you can see how much faster the autumn olives grow. And those have been pruned pretty heavily, but they just grow like 4 times faster than anything else that I plant here. So yeah, we'll see how those go. Here's a wild black cherry that's, that's probably a 10-year-old tree maybe, with a chestnut on the side. Now here is a nice little area, and actually we're lucky to see this with some flowers now. This is a wildflower garden I planted from plugs in, I don't know, 2013 maybe, and it's holding its own pretty well. We've got rosin weed there, the big clumping thing. This is a type of coreopsis, this kind of ground cover stuff. We've got a little bit of butterfly weed over there in orange that's just about to flower. Some Monarda in front of that that's just about to flower. Looks like there's not much grass in here, or not as many grasses, which is good. That's probably the reason why it looks so good. This beautiful plant there is Prairie Dock. It's got huge leaves, exotic leaves, and it's got its seed heads put up, but they're not flowering just yet. But right behind it is its cousin, Compass plant, and these are both in the Silphium family, as is this rosin weed and cup plant, which I'll pan over here and show you. That is cup plant. So these are all really deep-rooted, tough prairie plants that are very kind of architectural plants. They've big in the landscape and have kind of cool, interesting leaves. This, rough leaves. This one is called compass plant because the leaves are said to orient themselves to a north and south direction for the most part. That's kind of true. I guess I've noticed. And then there's some more black locust in the background that's suckering out. So I have to manage this black locust, and not let it grow everywhere. But for the time being, it's a nice thing to have around. There is a 9-bark bush that the deer finally let get out of their browsing range. They were keeping it pruned down pretty heavily for a while. Back behind this, we've got some old mulberry trees. There's an old box elder tree and some mulberry trees, and then a walnut that's grown up here. And the mulberries are kind of falling apart. The box elder is kind of falling apart. But it's just sort of succession happening. So we're kind of watching it. There's not very many mulberries to pick down at the ground level anymore like there used to be 5 years ago, but the lower branches have shaded themselves out and died off, so that's what happens. Over here we've got a couple of Catalpa trees, red bud. I planted at least 2 of those things. Behind that there's a hackberry that I transplanted from my yard in town, because they'll grow with walnuts no problem, and that's actually where that one was growing, was underneath a walnut. And here we go. Here's my favorite chestnut. This is the queen of the garden here. This thing has got to be 30 feet tall, and it was planted in 2012, I think. And I always tell people, if every tree that I had planted at my garden had grown like this one, I would have what would feel like a mature forest by now. But most of them haven't, or none of them have, except for this one, really. But yeah, you can see kind of I don't want that bark to get damaged, but nice, tall, straight growth form, sort of a timber growth form, and that's actually what this tree is called. It's called timber, B-U-R-R, play on words there, from Canada, Oikos. And yeah, this is a magnificent tree. I think it's got a few flowers on it this year. But it's definitely to size where it could be flowering and producing any year now. So I'm just so glad that it's growing so well here. And alongside of it, there's an autumn olive. You've got a few more chestnuts. These are Seguin chestnuts, which is a type from China that has small nuts that are kind of chickpea size, maybe in single burrs. I think I haven't had any nuts from those yet, but there are a few flowers on those trees this year, and those have died back to the ground at least once or twice also. So, they're not as large as they might have been if they'd never died back. And we've got some aronia on the ground here, and then we've got a couple nice chestnuts here that have done well, and these seem like they haven't had much dieback problem. But these are Chinkapin chestnuts, which are, they have small nuts. They're born singly in the burrs, and I had some nuts from these 2 years ago, and I don't think there were any last year. Could have been a late frost or some other problem that got them, or winter cold problem. But this one here is also a Chinkapin. And I'm not seeing flowers on, no, I guess there are the beginnings of flowers up at the top, but not flowering heavily like the one behind me is. So this, you got some wild black cherries here that are tall. Chestnut here, this one maybe has not died back much, although it does have multiple trunks, so maybe it did in the early years. That one's growing okay. It's made it out of deer browse level, so now it's just at deer rub level, so hopefully the deer won't kill it. In the tube here we've got a white birch. Those have grown pretty well for me for the most part. There's that nice Chinkapin chestnut with all the flowers on it again, and behind it the timber chestnut. And there's a nice oak here, something in the white oak family. I don't know what kind, but that's a wild seedling that some animal brought and planted, growing very nicely. In this area, lots of winged sumac, and I've pretty much let this stuff go outside of my path areas, and it's a great chop and drop mulch. It's a good early succession plant. This is a pecan tree that I planted, and pecans haven't grown super well for me. There's another one kind of in the middle distance there, but there's a lot of pecans in this area. Panning over here, there's one there, and there are a few more. So this, I'm in the shade right now of this wild black cherry, and this thing has all grown up in the last, I'd say 12 years. There was nothing here. Maybe it got mown over, and that's why it's got 5 or 6 trunks, but growing very, very well. It's a nice early succession tree. So as we walk over here back toward the power lines a bit, there's a bunch of pawpaws that I planted, and they were really struggling this spring because they started growing, started leafing out, and then we got a frost May 30th and zapped what few leaves they had grown. But I gave them a bunch of mulch and I watered them a bunch of times, and they've kind of bounced back, so I'm hoping that they will persist. There's one there. There's a small one in the tube behind that Catalpa tree there. I tried to plant Catalpa trees and stuff. There's one there, and there's one behind that Sumac there. Tried to plant things to the south of Pawpaws so that I could give them some shade, but that's worked out better in some cases than others. Here's a wild apple tree. It got gurgled by rabbits this winter. A lot of gurgling in the garden this last winter. I don't know what it was, but so this whole trunk died. Although that's one nice thing about them growing multiple trunks. You've got some backup insurance. Over here, I finally got my outhouse put back up, which is great to have that in the garden. So if people need to use the restroom, they can. And it's also important to me as a rainwater collection point, because it's kind of sort of in the middle of the back field here. And if I don't have that, then I have to walk, almost like 1,000 feet with water sometimes to bring water back for things, which is a lot of steps, It takes a lot of time. So walking through here, here's a little apple that I dug up from my yard in in town, and grafted it over to, let's see what variety. Liberty. So the graft looks like it's taking, which is awesome. Finally got some growth popping out there. So with any luck, that will be a Liberty apple tree. Here is the rootstock of an Asian pear that's been regrowing for about 7 years or so. And I'm surprised it's never flowered or fruited, but it's got these kind of interesting downy leaves and sort of spiky branches. It's kind of a ferocious plant, but it's attractive. And then of course I've got the false indigo planted to the south of almost every original target tree that I planted in this garden. So you'll see lots of those. Autumn olive here, red cedar. There's the chestnut. Jesus, this thing got all of its leaves eaten off. What's going on with this? And it looks like the top died, or is half dead, and then it's regrowing from the base, but the deer are eating all the regrowth. That was planted probably 9-10 years ago, so I don't have high hopes for that thing. Another 9-bark that finally got out of deer browse level. This is another chestnut coppice area. I got some mulch in here finally, and I think I kind of gave it a half-assed mowing. A lot more death dieback in these than the ones further up front. Again, that's probably because of my attention and my limited time and energy to water stuff. So these are a little bit more on their own. Again, autumn olive there growing at 5 times the rate of anything else, which is one reason it's such a successful plant in the wild. So looking back here, we're kind of looking northwest. There's a wild serviceberry here that the birds planted. I put a tube around it a few years ago to kind of protect it. There's some tulip poplars that I planted there, and chestnuts farther behind them. I think that's a red pine I planted. White birch I planted. Looks like maybe a Norway spruce I planted. Some butterfly weed, which is growing wild here, which I love to see. Another red pine. Little visual screen and windbreak of eastern red cedar. And these have filled out very nicely. This is probably done 7 years ago. And now it's at the point where I should probably remove every other one if I want them to look decent and stay full looking like that, because they're going to just grow into each other. We've got some more little sad chestnuts here. We've got a nice white birch there, false indigo. I should mow the path going south here, but I haven't. This is the huge thicket of wild American plum. Probably no fruit this year because of the late frosts. Another white birch, another white birch. I've put a couple more American plums back here for pollination reasons. This is a white pine that I planted. It's probably been 10 years, and it's starting to create its own little microclimate, you know, getting a nice bed of pine needles under there and sort of killing the grass off. There's a white birch that snapped over for some reason. More of this chestnut coppice. You'll see all these eastern red cedars. I kind of let them go for the most part, because just to give some, especially some winter interest. Autumn olives. These are a couple hazelnuts here. Had the first few nuts off of those in the last year or two. A little bit of dieback in here. I don't know what's going on. If it's filbert blight or something, you know, just winter stress or something, but don't know. Some nice growth of autumn olive here. These are probably Oikos ones. There's somebody in the woods over there. They probably hear me and think I'm an idiot. Maybe they're picking blackberries or raspberries. There's a Japanese butternut heartnut hybrid from Michael and over there. And here we are looking kind of from the middle of the backfield, looking south. South is this way. This is my oak savanna area, and so I did kind of widely spaced plantings of different low tannin oaks from Oikos's catalog, and they're growing up pretty well. Luckily the gypsy moths have not been devastating here. I've had a little bit of defoliation on the odd thing here and there, but not too bad. So this oak, I think it had a major problem and had to be pruned and then regrew. But you can see the bottom tier of leaves, they got frosted by the late frost, but the upper tiers of leaves didn't. So they probably should just prune those things off because they're growing so low anyway, but that's why they look kind of yellow. This is an American plum that I had tree spade transplanted from the front garden where the power lines came in, and it's growing okay. There's a hazelnut that kind of came along with it, growing up around its base. A couple of wild black cherries that I didn't plant, but are just kind of giving cover for the moment. A few pine trees and spruces that I planted in here. This is a serviceberry that I also had spaded from the front of the garden into the spot. And there are actually a couple of berries. This was a weird thing this year. This one branch of this tree flowered like a month after the rest of the tree did for some reason. And I don't know if they're self-fertile or what, but there's actually a few fruit on there, where most of my serviceberries didn't have any fruit this year because of the frosts, and then the drought and bug problems ruined all the other stuff. But this is kind of too empty out here, so I need to plant more stuff in here than I originally had envisioned. And a lot of the stuff has died, so it's just not very full. It feels very empty. But there's some new hazelnuts in here that I've stuck in. And going over this way, there are Oikos Oak there, Oikos Oak there, Oikos Oaks here and here. This is probably the nicest, largest Oikos Oak that I've planted. The least amount of weird problems or dieback. And this actually did have a couple acorns on it 2 years ago maybe. Let's see if we can see what the tag says. Burgamble Oak, Western. So that's what this this person is here. And growing nice. I've got a Catalpa tree growing in the drip line of it that I have to move, otherwise that'll be a problem. There's a wild cherry that I also probably should move or cut down at some point. Yeah, that one looks nice. Over here, again, not much density. Most of what I've planted has died. Korean nut pines didn't do well. They all died except one. There's one behind that pine over there. This is some kind of a spruce, I think. Growing pretty well. Didn't harvest any spruce tips this spring, and it's had some dieback. You'll see a lot of weird dieback. Like that one's got some, and then the growing tips of some things that I planted have died. So I don't know. You know, there's always different pest and disease problems that come up. I think that's a Chinkapin oak, wild black cherry, just a wild pine that I didn't plant. This area we've got I planted 7 red osier dogwoods in a kind of a pattern here, staggered formation. They've really grown poorly. The ground cover here is all dewberry. That's probably my most prominent ground cover, along with little blue stem. Autumn olive growing great. So this is kind of the southern extent of my property where these poles are. Beyond that, I don't own. And so now we're kind of getting back to the new hedgerow, the newly replanted hedgerow here. So this stuff is all like 1 or 2 years old. I planted it all last year, and I planted on a different pattern back here, knowing that I wasn't going to be able to water and care for the stuff as much. I planted in a double, kind of a staggered zigzag row, and the plant spacings are more like 4 feet apart in their rows, and then 2 rows. So they're almost like 2-foot spacings in practice. And there's a couple things that got mown over, but they sort of regrew, like this Nanking cherry probably sort of stayed alive from the old hedgerow that was here. So there's kind of a mix here of new plantings with a little bit of regrowth from the old plantings. So it's not very interesting at this point. You know, this grassy field is what a lot of this property looked like 10 years ago, and what a lot of it still looks like now. But we're trying to move it forward. This is a wildflower bed that I planted from seed. God, it's probably been 9-10 years. Looks like a bunch of nothing. There's not even, it used to just be nothing but brown-eyed Susans, and now there's hardly even those in there. It's just mostly grasses, which is pretty disappointing. Probably should burn it or something, but yeah, it's I would chalk that up as pretty much a failure. Persimmon area here, as we kind of, this whole half is mostly persimmon trees. Most of them have not grown well. Only a handful have ever gotten taller than me, or I'd say taller than waist high. You can see a couple there that are waist high. This one here is almost as tall as I am, but slow growing. Again, I can't get back here and mulch and water as much as I'd like to. There's some bark damage there. I've had some bark splitting issues, which I hope will not kill these trees off. But yeah, I wish this area was a lot nicer, because persimmons are one of my favorite fruits. This is a 2-year-old coppice of the false indigo, and you can see, well, in the wintertime you'd really see how much regrowth it puts out, and pretty straight stems. And actually I've used those stems after 1 year as sort of a material for making, not like a bamboo, but you could almost use them as like planting stakes or something for temporary use. There's a service berry of some kind growing in front of that or next to it. Here's an American hazel that's had a bunch of dieback. I'm not sure what's going on there. But yeah, most of these persimmons look like absolutely nothing. Here's an oak that I didn't plant. There's one nice persimmon back there. That's probably 9 feet tall, 8-9 feet tall. There's one in the foreground that's not too bad. I think that one actually got spaded out, and this may be a root sucker that regrew. But there's two persimmons that we spaded out and moved into my grandma's yard where we're going to be living. So just kind of coming near to the end of the persimmon area here. Yeah, again, this hedgerow is like a whole lot of nothing right now, but I hope in a couple of years, given the density of the planting, that it will fill out pretty well. I'm maintaining a pretty wide path here to drive down, so that you know, there's good access for the power company, because I don't own much beyond where I've planted. That's gonna have to be mown or dealt with every couple of years probably. Yeah, they're probably picking berries back there, which is cool. There's some autumn olives in this mix that I want to dig up and transplant out. Mostly it's just weedy regrowth of like oaks and quaking aspens and autumn olives and some apple tree sprouts. There's a nice autumn olive that, you can see just how fast those things grow. And then this little clump of bushes here probably pretty much avoided getting run over. That's why they're looking better than most. Panning over here, this is my pawpaw area again, or one of my pawpaw areas. Kind of becoming three-dimensional over time. And then I should point out that I've replanted kind of a new hedgerow all along here on the western edge of this driveway of hazelnuts from New Forest Farm. Selected hazelnuts that have better genetics, hopefully larger and more nuts than the average seedling hazelnut, but that remains to be seen. I've been planting those New Forest Farm hazelnuts for about 5 or 6 years now, and some of them are starting to bear, so we'll kind of see what happens. But yeah, this hedgerow is pretty boring. I threw some bird seed out here last year as kind of a cover crop, and it grew a bunch of weird like millets, and I don't even know what all the stuff was. It looked kind of like corn, but it wasn't corn. It was probably some kind of millet or whatever birds eat. The sunflowers, there was some of that in there. So yeah, I'll probably stop it there. It's already been 46 minutes, Jesus Christ. But that's the short tour. Probably gonna try to give a couple tours this year and maybe soon, because things are looking pretty decent, and I've just remown some of the paths. So I'll probably do that sooner than later, because I don't think I had any tours last year. Everything looked like crap last year too. But yeah, since we've got some moisture in the ground, I think we'll try to have a few people over. So thanks for watching. If you made it all the way through, that's impressive. And come by and visit sometime. Thanks.